Greetings and welcome to Lecture 2 of the Marco Polo Drive of Peace, Culture, and Sustainable Development. I'm in this beautiful Republic Square in the center of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. Last time we talked, I was standing in the Piazza San Pietro, St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, because that was the beginning of our journey eastward. Just as the Polos, Marco and his father Niccolo and Uncle Maffeo, carried a message from Pope Gregory X on their journey to China, I am carrying a message of peace from Pope Leo XIV. In fact, his new encyclical, which I strongly recommend to every person, every reader, every person in this class. It is Magnifica Humanitas, and it is an encyclical on modern society, on the need for peace, and on the challenge of artificial intelligence. So it's very much up to date. And at each stop of our journey, I am transmitting this wonderful message of peace to the leaders of all the countries that we meet. Since we were last together in St. Peter's Square, we journeyed north in Italy to Maranello, the home of Enzo Ferrari of the famed Ferrari automobile company, because we wanted to see, among other things, Ferrari's new all-electric vehicle, the Luce. And we saw that and many other wonders of Ferrari. And then from there, we went on to Venice, the great trading capital of centuries, 1,000 years ago, and of course, the home of Marco Polo and the Polo family. We saw amazing things in Venice, because Venice has been run as a republic for more than 1,000 years, in fact. The archives are meticulous. You can find, as I looked, for example, off the shelf, the exact minutes of the meeting of the Venetian Senate, and I looked at the date, October 1525, to see what they were debating that day. Everything was there, including all of the roll call votes, including what the margin of yes or nay was on these votes. And what we saw in these archives was the wonderful, vivid history of the last will and testament of Marco Polo himself, where he bequeathed his possessions, quite wealthy possessions, because remember, the Polo family were leading merchants of the mercantile capital of Venice. He bequeathed them to his wife and 3 daughters. And we saw other remarkable documents as well. From there, we crossed eastward into the Balkan Peninsula. Take a look at the map of Europe. Europe has 3 great peninsulas jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, the most westward is the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal. In the middle is Italy, the Italian peninsula, where we started our journey. And on the most eastward side is the Balkan Peninsula. And the Balkan Peninsula is home to what was former Yugoslavia, and now all of the successor states, including Serbia. Belgrade was the capital of federal Yugoslavia, and now Belgrade is the capital of the country of Serbia. As we crossed into the Balkan Peninsula, we went first to Ljubljana, the capital of the country of Slovenia. We met the wonderful president of Slovenia, President Musar, and I was happy to give her a copy of the encyclical and to have a very good discussion on global foreign affairs. From there, we went to Zagreb and met President Milanovic. And similarly, we had a wonderful discussion about global events, and I happily gave President Milanovic a copy of the encyclical. And from Croatia, we arrived here in Serbia, in Belgrade, a very famed and historic city, a wonderful city. And we met with President Vučić, again had a wonderful talk about the world scene, and happily I could hand him a copy of Magnifica Humanitas. Now, Belgrade is a city that goes back more than 2,000 years. It's a wonderful location. It sits at the confluence of two important rivers, the Sava River and the Danube. Wherever you are, watch physical geography because it shapes the history. And in the case of the Danube was the boundary for hundreds of years of the Roman Empire. And Belgrade was first a Celtic settlement. Even in the BCs, the Celts were an ethnic and linguistic large group of different languages and ethnicities in Central Europe. Their origin is actually not known. But the Celts were ultimately defeated by and incorporated into the Roman Empire, as was this place. So what started as a Celtic settlement became a Roman military settlement, first a garrison settlement, and then a Roman city at the boundaries of the Roman Empire, because the Danube formed the boundary with the northern regions, which were not part of the Roman Empire. Well, it's said, I can't verify it, but it's said that Belgrade has been fought over more times and changed hands more times between empires than just about any other place in the world, because it went from the Celts to the Romans, and then very complicated history of many kingdoms fighting over this place, including a long period in which the Ottoman Turks ruled over this location. And that reminds us of the equestrian statue we see in the background. The equestrian statue is of a great reformer prince of the 19th century who was one of the leaders of the independence of Serbia from the Ottoman Empire, which took place step by step in the 19th century. And Serbia became an independent state. It then joined with neighboring states. It eventually became Yugoslavia after World War, after World War I, I should say, and in various forms and various shapes and names. It was a group of nations. And then in the 1990s, Yugoslavia became independent nations, which they are today. Some within the European Union, and Serbia today as a candidate member of the European Union, but not in the European Union currently. We will continue our journey across the Balkan Peninsula to Bulgaria, which is on the eastern end of the Balkan Peninsula. We'll turn south, and then we will arrive at the historic city of Constantinople, Istanbul today, which I will describe to you in the third lecture. But today we're in a place that has been not only a fortress, not only a military encampment, but a trading center for 2,000 years. Because when you're on a major river like the Danube, that river carries commerce. And the Danube has been a great artery of commerce in Europe. So goods that would arrive on the Silk Route from China would reach Constantinople, from Constantinople and Alexandria in today's Egypt. Those goods would come to different parts of Europe, including coming to Belgrade as a kind of entrepot center where the goods could be further transported along the Danube or shipped to other parts of the Balkans region and other parts of Central and Eastern Europe. And because of that role in trade, I thought this would be a good occasion to introduce us to the Silk Route as a concept, or the Silk Roads as a concept, because after all, the Marco Polo drive of peace, culture, and sustainable development is a drive along the Silk Roads. So the Silk Roads are emblematic of everything that our joint trip, you and I together, are taking in these weeks, because the Silk Roads constitute the network of trade that connected East and West. East having its base and terminus in China, and West having its base and terminus in Rome. And Rome and Chang'an, the capital city of the early Chinese dynasties, were two of the largest, most populous cities in the world. Rome held that title for quite a long time, because even as early as 1 AD, Rome had 1 million inhabitants, something almost unimaginable, but it was so dynamic and so much part of a dynamic imperium. The Silk routes connect East and West, and they were the arteries along which international trade occurred. Why trade? Why do different regions trade? Why has trade been part of the human condition as long as there's been a humanity? And I don't exaggerate, because even in prehistoric, pre-civilization times, even before agriculture itself, we find evidence of long-distance exchange of valued goods, such as obsidian tools that were carried very long distances and obviously were part of a kind of trading network. And so trade goes back a long time. Why trade? Because different places have different things that they can share with other places. They can meet each other's needs and wants through voluntary exchange. And the most important economic concept of trade is that it's mutually beneficial. This is what the core message of the founder of modern economics, Adam Smith, taught in a very important book written exactly 250 years ago this year in 1776. Trade is mutually beneficial. It's not that there's a winner and that there's a loser, but it raises the well-being of all of the parties engaged in trade. And this is extremely important. So trade has been with us as long as we have been human beings spreading across the world, which is approximately the last 70,000 years, the most recent 70,000 years of human history. But the trade that I'm talking about goes back probably 2,500 years and is very, very well attested in the time of the Roman Empire and its counterpart, the Han Dynasty in China. Because we know from the great writers of Rome that the Roman women loved the silks that came from China. And so this is why these trade routes got the name the Silk Routes, because from the ancient times, perhaps the most prized commodity being traded along these trade routes was silk. Silk, of course, is a fine thread that is actually produced by the mulberry worm when it spins its cocoon. And the Chinese discovered thousands of years ago, and they have wonderful tales about that discovery, that if you take the cocoon of the mulberry worm and you drop it into hot water, the threads can be unraveled and can be a very strong material for the most wondrous fabrics. And so the Chinese learned the secret of silk early on, and the rest of the world wanted silk. And so the silk routes back to the Roman era and the Han dynastic era were trading silks. What were the Romans trading in return? Well, the Romans had many things to trade. Great wines produced in the Mediterranean region. Why wines? Because the western part of Eurasia has called a Mediterranean climate. A Mediterranean climate doesn't apply just to the Mediterranean Sea. It means to a geographer a place with wet winters and very sunny summers. And the grapes love that. And so the Mediterranean has been a place for millennia of growing the world's fine wines. I would say the finest wines, but I don't want to get into quibbles with other Mediterranean climates in other parts of the world, but fine wines. So the wines traded to the east, the silks flowed to the west. The Italians learned to make beautiful glasswork. And if you walk in Rome now, shop after shop is selling Murano glass. Beautiful glassworks. Well, already 2,000 years ago, this fine glassware that the Chinese could not exactly make were flowing from Rome to the east. Of course, Rome had silver and it had gold from mines in Iberia and elsewhere. And that was going both as bullion and as that is coinage, but also just as gold bars or silver bars for exchange. China, of course, sold other very prized possessions as well. Chinese porcelain has been coming from China to the West for millennia. Chinese tea, a favorite beverage of the whole world, has been part of the Silk routes. And the Silk routes were not only China and the Roman Empire, but they involved different parts of Eurasia as well. And there's a southern segment of the Silk routes in South Asia, today's India, and some of the most precious and favored spices, nutmeg and other spices, came from South Asia and Southeast Asia, from the island states of the day that constitute today's Malaysia and Indonesia and the Philippines. So this was spice trade, porcelain trade, silk trade, glassware trade, wine trade, and parts of West Asia involved in this Silk Road network as well. Frankincense, myrrh, and other spices and precious ointments, natural products that we use and treasure until today were already traded along this route. So this Silk Road extended east to west, roughly 10,000 kilometers. It's a vast expanse. But how to do that? Well, for us, not so hard. We jump in BYD electric vehicles. That's what we're demonstrating. The sunshine through solar panels produce the electricity, charge our batteries, and we're off and running. And the cars that we're driving in, at least the souped up models of these BYDs, are 1,000 horsepower vehicles. Of course, Marco Polo and his dad and his uncle didn't travel 1,000 horsepower. They each had 1 horsepower. They had a horse, and the horse carried them. And that's a very important part of the Silk Road concept. The horse was the BYD of the 13th century AD. The horse was the tank, the cavalry, the tractor, the BYD of 1000 BC. The horse is a wonderful, versatile technology. And I call it a technology. Obviously, it's a species, but the horse is a technology because humans had to domesticate the horse. Now, where was the horse domesticated? Along what is today's Silk Route. It's not a coincidence. By the way, there were horses in the Americas and horses in the Old World, in Eurasia. So you might think that there would be a Silk Route across North America. Unfortunately, the Native Americans made a bad mistake about 11,000 years ago. You know what they did? They hunted the horses to extinction. Bad move. Sometime around 8,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, 8,000 BC or 9,000 BC, the horses which were on the great grasslands of North America were hunted to extinction. And then they had to spend thousands and thousands of years walking rather than riding, because there were no large land animals that could carry the Native Americans. So this was a big mistake and a big lesson about sustainability. Do not destroy your mobility. Do not hunt it to extinction. But this did not happen in the grasslands of the Old World. Now, this is very important. That east-west expanse, as you move to different latitudes, has different characteristics. If you are at the equatorial latitudes, near 0 degrees latitude, then you're in rainforest territory. As you move north, you arrive at desert at a certain stretch, and you arrive at grasslands before you get to the wooded areas. So the steppe region is a grassland region. What is a grassland region? A grassland region is an area that has more rainfall than the equator, but less rainfall than a wooded or forested area. And for the physical geographers, a grassland, and also called a steppe region, S-T-E-P-P-E, is a region of 250 to 500 millimeters of rainfall per year. Less than that, you're in desert. More than that, you're in maybe a semi-arid or moving to an arid zone that'll have a lot of tree cover, and if you get even higher levels of precipitation, into standing forest. But the grasslands are wonderful for the horse, because what does the horse like to eat? Grass. And it's grasses that grow across the 8,000 kilometers of the steppe region of Eurasia. From all that we can tell from archaeological findings and from linguistic understanding, the horse was domesticated somewhere probably north of the Black Sea region, and from there civilization spread and in fact brought what today we call the Indo-European family of languages, which probably originated in that region around the Black Sea. But the horse was domesticated, not running wild, sometime 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, 2,000 to 3,000 BC. And once it was domesticated, it was what economists call a general purpose technology. You could use a horse for traction, that is for work on the farm. You could use a horse to pull a chariot in a war. You could use a horse sitting on horseback with a bow and arrow as cavalry, or with a lance as cavalry. Great military instrument, the tank of the earlier age. Now we have mechanized cavalry. Then we had the horse. So the horse was a military technology, it was an agricultural technology, but it was also a trade and communication technology, because the horse can run, and it can run with great stamina and great speed. And if you place horses at given intervals so that the horse doesn't have to run 8,000 kilometers, but can run 30 kilometers or 50 kilometers, and the message can be handed off to the next horse for another 50 kilometers and another 50 kilometers. You can make a modern communication system to spread information rapidly. How wonderful if you want to govern an empire. If you can't reach the outer range of your empire, you don't have a chance. If you can't transmit orders or find out information or understand if there's an insurrection or supervise the tax authorities, you can't run a large polity. But the horse made it possible. So we have a steppeland, a grassland that runs from west in Hungary all the way to the east, across today's Ukraine, across parts of Russia, into Central Asia, where we will be going, to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, right across into today's China, in Xinjiang province, in Inner Mongolia, and to the north in the sovereign country of Mongolia, continue eastward all the way to the Pacific, to modern-day Manchuria. So from Hungary all the way 8,000 to 10,000 kilometers to Manchuria, you had horses, grassland, pretty flat territory, vast open expanses, not so many mountain chains to cross, and you could then make what today we would call the superhighway. And the steppe region of Eurasia was the superhighway of the ancient and medieval world. It was the highway on which Marco Polo and Father Niccolo and Uncle Maffeo went from Venice to Kublai Khan's court in Xanadu, his summer palace in today's Inner Mongolia, and to Khanbalik, which is the Mongol name for today's Beijing, which was the winter palace. They went along the steppelands. Us together will be traveling along these steppelands. So this is a basic lesson of international trade, the benefits of having China produce the silks and the porcelains, and having the Roman Empire produce the wines and the fine glassware, and then being able to exchange with each other. It's also a lesson in technology, the domestication of the horse, the great general purpose technology of several thousand years, indeed, until the invention of the internal combustion engine in the 19th century. And it's a lesson in physical geography. That great grassland provided actually the route. Now, just to conclude, when Marco Polo traveled in 1271 to 1275 from Venice all the way to the court of Kublai Khan, in that 3.5 to 4 year venture across the steppelands, they could also go safely, not only fast because of the horses, not only across a known expanse, but also safely because at that time there was now one giant empire, the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire we're going to talk about in a later lecture, but it was founded by Kublai Khan's grandfather, Genghis Khan, meaning king of the universe, and he founded this great empire when he became the great Khan in 1206 AD, and he died about 20 years after that. Kublai Khan is his grandson. We're going to study the Mongol history, but by the time that Marco Polo and his uncle and father were traveling together, there was, historians have called, Pax Mongolica, the Mongolian peace. Peaceful, vast region, because it was all under one political authority, and the Khan protected the travelers along the way. It was said that a maiden could travel by herself with precious possessions, unharmed, unthreatened across the Pax Mongolica. And whether that's literally the case or not, it is true that travelers could travel vast distances safely. So that's the journey that the Polos took across the steppelands of Eurasia to reach Kublai Khan. When they came back by sea. By that time, the Mongols had become great seafarers as well as a great land-based empire. We're going to talk about that as well. But just to recall that the Silk routes, not the road, but the Silk routes, include the overland areas between Europe and China, but also the sea routes that connected China with Europe through the Indian Ocean, and then through the port of Hormuz, a place we've all come to know in a strange way because of this terrible, unnecessary war waged by the United States and Israel against Iran, and through the Red Sea and what is today the Suez Canal, something that would not be built until the second half of the 19th century, but still allowed through the Red Sea, bringing goods by sea close to the land areas where then they could be transported to the Mediterranean and then carried across the Mediterranean. So we're on a vast journey. We're right as part of a great trading site for 2,000 years, a highly contested one, a place where empires have battled because it's such valuable real estate, frankly speaking, and it's been on the borderlands of Europe and Asia. We're going to see this history play out. But when there is peace, there can be trade. When there is trade, there is mutual gain. And that's our hope for peace, culture, and sustainable development in the 21st century.